The billionaire falls in love with nurse assistant after she took care of him like a child. They say love comes when you least expect it. But what if the love you've been searching for your entire life was standing right in front of you and you didn't even notice? James Lancaster had it all: wealth, power, and a life most could only dream of. But after a near-fatal accident, he found himself trapped in a hospital bed, helpless and vulnerable for the first time in his life. That's when he met her. Naomi Bricks, his nurse assistant, treated him like any other patient, unmoved by his wealth, unshaken by his attitude. But just as James began to see her as more than just a caregiver, danger struck. Someone wanted him dead, and Naomi was caught in the crossfire. Would James risk everything to protect the woman who healed not just his body, but his heart? Or would dangers of his past destroy them both? Welcome back to the channel, my beautiful story family. I want to take a moment to sincerely appreciate every single one of you for being part of this growing community. Your support means everything to me. We pour our hearts into these stories, hoping they bring valuable lessons about love, humility, and kindness. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from? Drop it in the comments. This is a story of love, redemption, and the unexpected ways our hearts find home. Now, let's begin. James Lancaster woke to the sharp sting of antiseptic air biting at his nose, the sterile hum of machines threading through his foggy mind. Pain radiated from his ribs, a jagged reminder of the twisted metal and shattered glass that had brought him here. Hamilton Memorial Hospital wasn't where a man like him, billionaire, titan of industry, a name that commanded boardrooms and bent markets, ever expected to land. He blinked against the harsh light, his vision swimming, and tried to sit up. A bolt of agony pinned him back to the bed. "Easy there," came a voice, steady and unshaken, cutting through the haze. "You're not in any shape to be calling the shots right now." He turned his head, slowly, because even that hurt, and saw her. Naomi Bricks stood by his bedside, her dark hair pulled into a no-nonsense ponytail, her hazel eyes fixed on him with an intensity that didn't waver. She wasn't starstruck, wasn't fumbling over herself like the assistants and executives who orbited his life. She held a clipboard, her posture straight, her navy scrubs crisp despite the late hour. To her, he wasn't James Lancaster, the untouchable mogul. He was just a man with a bruised body and a fractured ego. "I don't need anyone hovering over me," he rasped, his voice rough from the tube that had been yanked out of his throat hours ago. "Get my doctor, now." Naomi didn't flinch. She set the clipboard down on the rolling tray with a deliberate clack, crossing her arms. "You may be used to snapping your fingers and watching the world jump, but in this room, you're not the one in charge. I am, and right now you need rest. Doctor's orders, not mine." James stared at her, his jaw tightening. People didn't talk to him like that, ever. He was the one who gave orders, the one who made others scramble. Yet here she was, this nurse assistant, barely 5'5" with a voice that carried the weight of unshakable resolve, standing her ground. For a moment he didn't know whether to fire back or laugh. A smirk tugged at his lips instead, faint but real. Feisty. "I like that." Naomi's expression didn't soften. "Good for you. Now lie back before you rip those stitches and I have to clean up the mess." She turned to adjust the IV drip, her movements precise, practiced. James watched her, his annoyance giving way to something else. Curiosity, maybe. Everyone in his world bent to his will, polished their words to please him. But Naomi? She didn't care who he was, and that, more than the pain or the sterile walls, threw him off balance. The hours blurred as she moved in and out of his room, checking vitals, adjusting pillows, offering water with a quiet firmness that left no room for argument. He caught fragments of her, calloused hands that spoke of long shifts, a faint scar above her left eyebrow, a way of tilting her head when she listened to the monitor's beeps. She wasn't warm, not in the syrupy way he'd come to expect from people trying to win his favor. She was real, blunt, human, and it unsettled him in a way he couldn't name. Late that night, as the hospital quieted and the lights dimmed, his phone buzzed on the bedside table. He reached for it, wincing at the pull in his side, and Naomi's hand shot out, stopping him. "You're not supposed to move that much," she said, her tone clipped. "Give it to me." He glared but relented, letting her pick it up. She glanced at the screen, unknown number, then handed it over. "Make it quick." He swiped to answer, his voice low. "Lancaster." A pause, then a voice slithered through the line, cold and deliberate. "You think you're untouchable, don't you? That crash wasn't fate, James. It was a warning. Next time we won't miss." The line went dead. His grip tightened on the phone, his pulse kicking up despite the meds dulling his system. Naomi watched him, her brow creasing slightly. "Who was that?" "None of your business," he snapped, tossing the phone onto the bed. But his mind raced. The accident, a sleek black car swerving into his lane, the screech of tires, the world tilting, hadn't felt random even then. Now, with those words echoing in his head, certainty gripped him. Someone wanted him dead. Naomi didn't press, but her eyes lingered on him, sharp and assessing. "You're pale? Need me to get the doctor?" "No," he said too quickly, then softer. "No. I'm fine." She didn't buy it, he could tell, but she nodded anyway, stepping back. "Rest. I'll be back in an hour." As she left, the room felt colder, the weight of that call pressing against his chest. James Lancaster wasn't a man who scared easily. He'd built an empire on steel nerves and calculated risks. But lying there, broken and exposed, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Someone was watching him, waiting. And Naomi Bricks, this unyielding woman who treated him like he was no one special, was now the only person in this sterile cage who felt remotely like an anchor. The next day, he tested her again. "You're wasting your time here," he said as she adjusted his bandages, his tone cutting. "A woman like you, smart, quick, could, but you're not getting anywhere wiping tables for minimum wage." Naomi didn't pause, her fingers steady as she retaped the gauze. "And you're wasting your breath thinking I care what you think about my life." He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "You've got a mouth on you. Ever think about working for me? I could use someone who doesn't kiss up." She met his gaze, unflinching. "I'd rather scrub bedpans than grovel for a paycheck." "Fair enough," he said, leaning back, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "But you're good at this. Too good to be stuck here." "Maybe I like it here," she shot back. "Not everyone's chasing your kind of life." He studied her, intrigued. Most people saw his world, money, power, influence, and wanted a piece. Naomi didn't. She was a puzzle, one he found himself wanting to figure out, even as his ribs ached and that threat lingered in the back of his mind. Days passed and a strange rhythm settled between them. She'd challenge him. He'd push back. He'd try to charm her. She'd deflect with a quip or a roll of her eyes. But there were moments, fleeting ones, where he caught her watching him, not with pity, but with something softer, like she saw past the arrogance to the man beneath. It rattled him more than he'd admit. One evening, as she helped him stand for the first time since the crash, his legs wobbled and he grabbed her arm. Her strength held him up, steady and sure. "You're heavier than you look," she muttered. "And you're stronger than you seem," he replied, his voice low. Their eyes locked for a beat too long, the air thick with something unspoken. Then she pulled away, breaking the moment. "Sit down before you fall," she said, brisk. But he didn't miss the flush creeping up her neck. That night, alone again, his phone buzzed, another unknown number. He answered, heart thudding. "You're a hard man to kill, Lancaster," the voice said, smooth and taunting, "but everyone has a weakness. Wonder what yours is." The call ended, leaving him staring into the dark. A weakness. His mind flicked to Naomi, her steady hands, her sharp tongue, the way she'd somehow slipped under his guard. Number, she wasn't that. She couldn't be. Yet the thought lodged itself deep, a splinter he couldn't shake. The next morning he watched her more closely as she worked. She was tired, shadows under her eyes, a slight slump in her shoulders, but she didn't complain. "Why do you do this?" he asked suddenly. "This job, these hours?" She hesitated, then shrugged. "Someone's got to. Might as well be me." It was a half answer, and he knew it. There was more to her, layers she kept hidden. He wanted to dig, to understand her, but before he could press, an alarm blared. Another patient coding down the hall. She was gone in an instant, leaving him with his questions and a growing unease. Whoever was after him wasn't done. He could feel it, the pressure building, the threat closing in. And Naomi, whether he liked it or not, was tangled up in it now. He didn't know how or why, but the idea of her caught in the crossfire twisted something in his chest. For the first time in years, James Lancaster wasn't sure he could protect what mattered. And that scared him more than the voice on the phone ever could. Have you ever met someone who completely changed your perspective on life? Tell us your experience in the comments. James lay in the dim hospital room, the steady beep of the monitor his only company as night crept in. His body ached, a dull throb that refused to relent, but his mind was restless. The calls, those taunting, venomous voices, kept replaying in his head, each one tightening the knot in his gut. He couldn't control that, couldn't fight it from this bed. But Naomi? She was here. She was something he could test, something he could push against. If he couldn't bend the world back into shape, he'd see how far he could bend her. The next morning he started small. When she brought his pills, tiny white capsules meant to dull the pain, he flicked them off the tray with a lazy swipe of his hand. They scattered across the floor, rolling under the bed. Naomi froze, her jaw tightening as she stared at the mess. "Oops," he said, his tone dripping with mock innocence. "Guess you'll have to get more." She didn't snap, didn't even sigh. She just crouched down, picked up the pills one by one, and stood, her face a mask of calm. "You're not the first stubborn one I've dealt with," she said, placing a fresh dose in his hand. "Take them. Now." He smirked, popping them into his mouth with exaggerated slowness, watching her for a crack. None came. By afternoon, he upped the game. "I want coffee," he declared as she adjusted his IV. "Not that swill from the cafeteria. Real coffee. Black. From that place on 5th. Brew and bean. Go get it." Naomi didn't look up from her work. "I'm not your errand girl, Lancaster. You'll drink what's here or you won't drink at all." "You're my nurse, aren't you?" he shot back, leaning forward despite the stab in his ribs. "I'm asking for something. Do your job." She straightened, meeting his gaze with that unflinching steel he was starting to recognize. "My job is to keep you alive, not cater to your tantrums. You want coffee? Call one of your minions." "Oh, wait. You can't, because you're stuck here like the rest of us mortals." His laugh was sharp, edged with frustration. "You're impossible." "Takes one to know one," she replied, turning away to scribble something on his chart. He glared at her back, but there was a flicker of respect there, grudging and unfamiliar. That evening he pushed harder. The tray of hospital food, grayish mashed potatoes and overcooked chicken, sat untouched. When Naomi came to clear it, he shoved it off the table entirely. It clattered to the floor, splattering across her shoes. "I'm not eating this garbage," he snapped. "Get me something decent or I'll starve." She stood there, hands on her hips, staring at the mess. For a moment he thought he'd finally broken her. Those hazel eyes flashed, her lips pressed into a thin line. But then she knelt, grabbed a napkin, and started wiping her shoes without a word. When she stood, her voice was low, steady. "You're not a child, James. Stop acting like one. You don't eat, you don't heal. Your choice." The use of his first name hit him like a jolt. "No, Mr. Lancaster, no deference, just James." He opened his mouth to fire back, but nothing came. She held his stare, unyielding, and he felt the fight drain out of him. She wasn't playing his game. She never had. Days bled into nights, and he kept testing her, snapping over small things, demanding the impossible, watching for her to falter. She didn't. She'd counter his barbs with dry wit, meet his demands with quiet refusal, and somehow, every time, she'd leave him feeling smaller than he'd intended. It infuriated him. It fascinated him. Then came the night that shifted everything. He woke from a fitful sleep, his chest tight, the room cloaked in shadows. Naomi was there, her silhouette soft against the glow of the IV monitor. She was checking the line, her fingers deft, and as she worked, a low hum slipped from her lips. A melody, faint and familiar. It tugged at something deep in him, a thread long buried. His breath caught. That song. His mother used to hum it when he was small, when the world was just her voice and the warmth of her arms. Before the money, before the power, before he'd built walls around himself no one could breach. "What's that?" he asked, his voice rough, unguarded. Naomi stopped, glancing at him. "What's what?" "That song. You were humming." She shrugged, turning back to the fourth. "Just something my grandma used to sing. Helps me focus." He didn't push, but he couldn't unhear it. The notes lingered, stirring memories he'd locked away. His mother's laugh, the way she'd ruffle his hair, the safety he hadn't felt since. He watched Naomi, her face softened by the dim light, and for the first time, he didn't see the stubborn nurse assistant who defied him. He saw a woman who carried her own weight, her own past, and didn't bend under his. The next day, he didn't fight her. When she brought the pills, he took them. When she set the tray down, he ate, grudgingly, but he ate. She noticed, her brow lifting slightly, but she didn't comment. The silence between them wasn't tense anymore. It was something else, charged, alive with questions neither of them voiced. That night, his phone buzzed again. He grabbed it before she could, his pulse spiking. "Lancaster," he said, low. "Getting cozy with the help, are we?" The voice purred, smooth and cutting. "She's a pretty little thing. Be a shame if she got caught up in your mess." The line went dead. James's hand shook as he dropped the phone, his mind racing. They knew about Naomi. How? He glanced at the door. She was out there, finishing her rounds, oblivious to the shadow creeping closer. His chest tightened, not from pain but from something fiercer. He'd spent days testing her, pushing her, but now he realized she wasn't just a puzzle to solve. She was someone he didn't want to lose. When she came back, he watched her with new eyes. "You ever think about quitting this place?" he asked, his tone softer than usual. She paused, surprised. "Sometimes. But then who'd put up with you?" He smiled, a real one, not the smirk he hid behind. Fair point. She lingered by his bed, her guard down for once, and he felt it, the shift, the pull. He didn't know what it meant, not yet. But as her humming echoed in his mind and that threat loomed larger, one thing was clear. Naomi Bricks wasn't just his nurse anymore. She was something he couldn't let go of, and that terrified him more than any voice on the phone ever could. The air in James's hospital room grew heavier as the days wore on, the tension between him and Naomi shifting into something unspoken but undeniable. He didn't push her as hard now. His tantrums softened into gruff requests, his barbs dulled by the memory of that hummed melody. She'd caught him off guard, slipped past the armor he'd worn for years, and he wasn't sure how to feel about it. One evening, as she adjusted his pillows with that quiet efficiency he'd come to rely on, he reached out, his hand brushing hers. She froze, her eyes flicking to his, and for a heartbeat, neither of them moved. "You don't have to do this, you know," he said, his voice low, almost tender. "Put up with me." Naomi pulled her hand back, but not before he saw the flicker of something, uncertainty maybe, in her gaze. "Someone's got to," she replied, her tone light but unsteady. "Besides, you're not as tough as you think." He chuckled, the sound raw in his throat. "You're the only one who'd say that." She didn't respond, just turned away to check his chart, but the moment lingered, fragile and electric. He watched her, the curve of her shoulders, the way she moved like she carried the weight of more than just this job. He wanted to ask about the song, about her life, about why she stayed. But before he could, his phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. His stomach twisted as he answered. "Enjoying your little nurse, Lancaster?" The voice sneered, sharp and cold. "She's making this too easy. Keep her close. It'll hurt more when we take her away." The call cut off, and James's blood ran cold. He stared at the phone, then at Naomi, who was scribbling something on a clipboard, oblivious. They knew her. They were watching. And he'd dragged her into this, whatever this was, without even realizing it. The next morning, the hospital felt different. The halls buzzed with their usual chaos, but there was a weight pressing down, a shadow James couldn't shake. He caught glimpses of it. A man in a dark coat lingering by the vending machines, a car idling too long in the parking lot. His accident hadn't been chance. He'd known it deep down, but now it was clawing its way to the surface. Business rivals, vipers he'd outmaneuvered in boardrooms and buried in deals, wanted him gone, and they weren't stopping at him. Naomi felt it too, though she didn't know why. The air was off, the rhythm of her shift disrupted. She brushed it off as exhaustion. Double shifts, restless patience, James's constant presence wearing her down. But that night, as she stepped out of his room to grab fresh linens, she heard it. Voices, low and urgent, just around the corner. "If he doesn't die in that hospital bed, we'll make sure he never leaves alive," one said, his tone clipped, precise. "What about the nurse?" another asked, quieter but no less cold. "She's a loose end. Take care of her too." Naomi's breath caught, her heart slamming against her ribs. She pressed herself against the wall, the stack of sheets trembling in her arms. The men moved off, their footsteps fading, but the words stayed, sharp and heavy. She stood there, frozen, her mind racing. James. They meant James. And her. They knew her. She wasn't just a nurse to them. She was a target. She slipped back into his room, her face pale, her hands unsteady. James noticed instantly. "What's wrong?" he asked, sitting up despite the ache in his side. "Nothing," she lied, too quick, too shaky. She busied herself with the IV, her fingers fumbling. "Tell him." She couldn't. He'd panic, or worse, he'd push her away to protect her, and she'd lose the only anchor she had in this mess. Keep quiet. That meant carrying this alone, waiting for those men to come back. Her chest tightened, fear coiling tight. "You're a terrible liar," he said, his voice cutting through her thoughts. He reached for her wrist, gentle but firm, forcing her to stop. "Naomi, talk to me." She met his eyes, those piercing blue eyes that saw too much, and her resolve wavered. I heard something," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. "Outside, 2 men. They're after you and me." His grip tightened, his face hardening. "What did they say?" She swallowed, the words bitter on her tongue. "That you won't leave here alive, and I'm a loose end." James's jaw clenched, a storm brewing behind his gaze. He let go of her wrist, leaning back, his mind already spinning. "They're not wrong," he muttered, more to himself than her. "I've made enemies. Too many." Naomi stared at him, her fear sharpening into something else, anger, maybe, or desperation. "Who are they? What did you do?" He looked at her, really looked at her, and for once the mask slipped. "I built an empire," he said, his voice raw. "Stepped on necks to do it. Some of them want payback." "And me?" she pressed, her voice rising. "Why me?" "Because you're here," he said simply, and the weight of it hit her hard. "Because you matter to me." The confession hung there, stark and unguarded, and Naomi didn't know what to do with it. She stepped back, her breath uneven. "I didn't sign up for this." "Neither did I," he shot back, softer now. "But here we are." Silence stretched between them, thick with fear and something deeper. Outside, the hospital hummed on, but in that room the world narrowed to just them. Two people caught in a web neither had woven. Naomi's mind raced. Tell security. Run. Stay. Every choice felt like a trap. And James, he looked at her like she was the only thing keeping him grounded, even as the threat closed in. She didn't notice the figure across the street, cloaked in shadow, watching the window of room 412. A phone pressed to his ear. He murmured, "She knows." "We move tomorrow." The line clicked off and the night swallowed him whole. Inside, Naomi made her choice. She stayed, trembling but resolute, beside the man who'd pulled her into this storm. For better or worse, their fates were tied now, and neither of them could outrun what was coming. Naomi barely slept, her mind looping through the men's voices, the cold precision of their plan. She stayed close to James, her every move shadowed by the weight of what she knew. He noticed. How could he not? But he didn't press her again. Instead, he watched, his blue eyes tracking her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. The danger was real, closing in, and yet he sat there, propped against the pillows, a king on a cracked throne, unshaken. Outside, the shadow lingered. The man in the dark coat stood beneath a flickering street lamp, his gaze fixed on James's window. He lit a cigarette, the ember glowing briefly as he exhaled a thin plume of smoke. His phone buzzed and he answered with a grunt. "He's still breathing," he said, voice low. "She's with him. Tomorrow we end it." The call ended and he melted back into the night, leaving only the faint scent of tobacco behind. Inside, Naomi's nerves frayed further. She checked James's vitals for the third time that hour, her hands trembling as she adjusted the monitor. He caught her wrist again, lighter this time, his touch warm against her cold skin. "You're going to wear yourself out," he said, his tone almost teasing. She yanked her hand free, glaring at him. "And you're just sitting there like nothing's wrong." He tilted his head, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "Something's always wrong. I'm used to it." Her anger flared, hot and sudden. "This isn't a game, James. Those men, they're coming for you, for us, and you're acting like it's just another day." He leaned back, his expression maddeningly calm. "I've got people looking into it. I'm not helpless." "Then why are you still here?" she snapped, stepping closer, her voice rising. "You're not even trying to protect yourself. You could leave, get out of this place, but you won't." James's smirk faded, but his eyes didn't waver. "Running's not my style, Naomi. Never has been." She stared at him, her chest heaving. "And why not? You're a target. They want you dead." He paused, then leaned forward, his voice dropping to a quiet, steady cadence. "And why do you care so much, Nurse Bricks?" The question hit her like a punch, stealing her breath. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Why did she care? He was arrogant, infuriating, a man who'd dragged her into this nightmare without a second thought. Yet here she was, tethered to him, her heart racing not just from fear, but from something deeper, something she couldn't name. His gaze held hers, searching, and for a moment she saw it, the crack in his armor, the flicker of vulnerability he hid so well. She started, then shook her head, turning away. Forget it. Naomi, he called, softer now, but she didn't stop. She stormed out, the door swinging shut behind her, her footsteps echoing down the hall. Her mind churned, a mess of anger and confusion. She cared, too much, and that scared her more than the men plotting in the shadows. She didn't know what to do with it, this pull toward him, this ache that grew every time he looked at her, like she was more than just his nurse. Back in the room, James stared at the closed door, his calm facade slipping. He rubbed a hand over his face, exhaling sharply. She was right. He wasn't running. Not because he couldn't, but because he wouldn't. He'd built his life on standing his ground, facing down threats with a cold smile. But now it wasn't just him. It was her, and that changed everything. He reached for his phone, dialing a number he hadn't used in months. "It's me," he said when the line picked up. "I need you to dig deeper. They're moving tomorrow, and keep an eye on her. She's not part of this." As he hung up, his gaze drifted to the window. He couldn't see the man outside, but he felt him. The weight of eyes on him, the promise of violence creeping closer. Naomi was caught in it now, and he'd be damned if he let her pay for his sins. For the first time in years, James Lancaster wasn't sure he could control the outcome, and that uncertainty, more than any threat, kept him awake long after the hospital lights dimmed. Naomi's footsteps echoed through the empty hospital corridor as she fled James's room, her heart pounding against her ribs. His words, "And why do you care so much, Nurse Bricks?" looped in her mind, sharp and insistent. She didn't have an answer, not one she could face. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the sound grating against her frayed nerves. She needed air, space, anything to clear the tangle of emotions choking her. She grabbed her coat from the break room and headed for the parking lot, oblivious to the shadow trailing her from a distance. James stayed behind, his calm cracking as the door clicked shut. He clenched his fists, the sting of her exit cutting deeper than he'd expected. She cared. He'd seen it in her eyes, felt it in the tremble of her voice, but she wouldn't admit it. Neither would he, not fully. Yet the danger closing in wasn't just his anymore. It was hers, too. He grabbed his phone again, his voice tight as he spoke to his security chief. "She's leaving. Follow her. Now don't let her out of your sight." Outside, the night was cold, the parking lot a stretch of asphalt, bathed in the weak glow of streetlights. Naomi hugged her coat tighter, her breath fogging in the air. She didn't see the figure until it was too late. A man in a dark hoodie stepping from behind a van, his movements swift and silent. "Naomi Bricks," he said, his voice low, edged with menace. "You should have stayed out of it." She froze, her keys slipping from her hand to clatter on the ground. "What? Who are you?" she stammered, backing up. He didn't answer, just lunged. She stumbled, her scream cut short as he grabbed her arm, yanking her toward the van. Panic surged, and she fought, clawing, kicking, anything to break free. Then headlights flared, tires screeched, and two men in black suits burst from a car that had been idling nearby. James's security. "Get off her," one shouted, tackling the attacker. The other pulled Naomi back, shielding her as fists flew. The kidnapper grunted, swinging a knife that glinted in the light, but the guards were faster, trained, relentless. One disarmed him with a sharp twist, the blade skidding across the pavement, while the other pinned him face down, a knee in his back. Naomi sank against the car, shaking, her breath ragged. The guards hauled the man up, his hood falling back to reveal a face she didn't know. Hard, unshaven, eyes burning with hate. "This isn't over," he spat before they dragged him off. She didn't move until the hospital doors burst open and James appeared, limping but furious, his hospital gown flapping over the sweatpants he'd demanded earlier. His security had called him the second they'd intervened. He crossed the lot in long, uneven strides, ignoring the pain shooting through his side. When he reached her, he grabbed her shoulders, his grip tight, his eyes wild. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, scanning her face. "Naomi, talk to me." "I'm fine," she managed, her voice trembling. "Just shaken." "Shaken?" he roared, his hands tightening. "You should have told me. Damn it, Naomi, I could have lost you out here." She flinched, then shoved him back, her own anger flaring through the fear. "Told you what? That I heard them? That they want me dead too? I didn't want to drag you into this." "Drag me?" He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "I'm already in it. You think I'd let you face this alone?" She stared at him, her chest heaving, tears stinging her eyes. "I didn't ask for any of this, James. I didn't ask for you. And I didn't ask for you to matter," he shot back, his voice breaking. He stepped closer, his hands dropping to his sides, but the space between them crackled. "But you do, and I'll be damned if I let them touch you again." Naomi's breath hitched, the weight of his words crashing into her. She was still shaking, the adrenaline fading into something raw, unguarded. His fury wasn't just about the attack. It was about her, about the fear he'd buried until now. She saw it in the clench of his jaw, the way his hands flexed like he wanted to pull her closer but didn't dare. "I was scared," she whispered, almost to herself. "I didn't know what to do." "You don't have to know," he said, softer now, his voice rough with emotion. "Just stay with me. Let me fix this." She didn't answer, couldn't. The tension stretched tight, their eyes locked, the night pressing in around them. The guards hovered nearby, the attacker subdued, but none of it mattered. It was just them, two people caught in a storm, tethered by something neither could name. Naomi stepped back, breaking the moment, but the pull remained, fierce and undeniable. James watched her, his resolve hardening. Whatever came next, he'd protect her, even if it cost him everything. The parking lot faded into a blur as Naomi stood there, James's hands still lingering near her shoulders, the heat of his touch seeping through her coat. The guards dragged the attacker away, his threats echoing faintly as they stuffed him into the back of a black SUV. James's eyes didn't leave her, his fury simmering into something quieter but no less intense. "You're not going back out there alone," he said, his voice a low growl. "Not after this." "I can handle myself," she shot back, though her shaking hands betrayed her. She bent to pick up her keys, needing something, anything to steady her. "Clearly," he said, dry and sharp. "That's why I had to send my guys to pull some thug off you." She glared at him, but the fight drained out of her as the reality sank in. She wasn't safe, not here, not anywhere, not anymore. James stepped closer, his tone softening. "Come with me, my place. You'll be safe there." "No," she said, too quick, too stubborn. "I'm not some damsel you get to lock away." "It's not about that," he snapped, then caught himself, exhaling hard. "It's about keeping you alive. Please, Naomi." She hesitated, the plea in his voice tugging at her. But pride won out. She shook her head and walked away, leaving him standing there, fists clenched, watching her go. The next night it happened again. She'd barely stepped out of the hospital when a car roared up, headlights blinding her. A figure lunged, different from before, faster, and she hit the ground, pain exploding in her knee as she scrambled back. A gunshot cracked the air, James's security again, always a step behind her now, and the attacker fled, tires squealing. She sat there, panting, blood trickling from a scrape on her arm, until one of the guards hauled her up. "Boss's orders," he said gruffly. "You're coming with us." She didn't argue this time. She couldn't. James's penthouse was a world apart from the hospital, a sprawl of glass and steel perched high above the city, all sharp lines and quiet luxury. Naomi stood in the living room, arms crossed, feeling out of place in her scuffed sneakers and wrinkled scrubs. James watched her from the doorway, leaning against the frame, his hospital limp barely noticeable now. "You can hate me all you want," he said, "but you're staying." "I don't hate you," she muttered, avoiding his gaze. "I just don't like being caged." "It's not a cage," he replied, stepping closer. "It's a fortress, and you're not the only one stuck here." She shot him a look, but there was no bite in it. The truth was she was too tired to fight, and too rattled to be alone. So she stayed. The days that followed were strange, a collision of their worlds. Naomi's things, hastily packed by James's staff, arrived in a duffel bag, and soon her chaos crept into his pristine space. A hoodie slung over a chair, a stack of dog-eared paperbacks teetering on the counter, a coffee mug left unwashed in the sink. One morning, James wandered into the kitchen, barefoot in a rare casual shirt, and smirked as he surveyed the mess. "You're a tornado, you know that?" She glanced up from the couch where she was sprawled with a book. "And you're a control freak. We're even." He laughed, a real laugh, warm and unguarded, and she couldn't help but smile back. It was the first crack in the wall between them, small but real. That night, she cooked. Nothing fancy, just pasta with sauce from a jar she'd found in his absurdly stocked pantry, but the act felt grounding, normal. James hovered nearby, pretending to check his phone, but she caught him watching her stir the pot. "You're staring," she said, not looking up. "Caught me," he admitted, leaning against the counter. "Didn't peg you for a chef." "I'm not, but I can feed myself. And you, apparently." She slid a plate toward him and he took it, his fingers brushing hers. He sat across from her at the island, eating in silence at first, then paused, his fork hovering. "This is good," he said, almost surprised. "Better than the hospital slop." "High praise," she quipped, but her chest warmed at the softness in his tone. He set the fork down, his gaze settling on her. "You're the first person who's taken care of me without expecting something in return." She froze, the weight of his words sinking in. "I'm not—" she started, then stopped, unsure what to say. I don't know. It's what I do." "Not for me, it's not," he said quietly. "People see me and they see dollar signs, power, a stepping stone. You don't." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw the man beneath the billionaire. The one who'd hummed her grandmother's song back to her in the hospital, who'd fought through pain to reach her in that parking lot. He wasn't just the cold, untouchable James Lancaster anymore. He was James, flawed, human, and staring at her like she'd rewritten something fundamental in his world. The air shifted, heavy with what neither would say. She stood to clear the plates, needing distance, but he caught her wrist, gentle but firm. "Naomi," he said, his voice low. "Thank you." She nodded, swallowing hard, and pulled away. But the moment lingered, threading through the quiet of the penthouse. Outside, the city glittered, oblivious to the danger still circling them. Another attack could come, would come, and they both knew it. Yet here, in this fragile bubble, something else was growing, something neither had expected. Do you believe love can bloom in the most unexpected places? Share your thoughts in the comments. The penthouse settled into an uneasy rhythm, a fragile truce between Naomi's stubborn independence and James's quiet insistence on keeping her close. The pasta dinners became a ritual, her cooking, him watching, their banter sharpening into something comfortable, almost intimate. One evening, as she chopped vegetables with a focus that betrayed her restless mind, James leaned against the counter, his gaze softer than usual. "You're good at this," he said, nodding at the knife in her hand. Ever think about opening a restaurant? She snorted, not looking up. With what money? This is survival, not a career plan. He didn't push, but the comment stuck with him, a thread he couldn't leave alone. Later that night, alone in his study, he made a call. Dig into her, he told his investigator, voice low. Discreetly. I need to know who she is. The next day, the report landed in his inbox. Naomi Bricks. 28, no criminal record, no flashy past, just a woman stretched thin. Her mother, Ellen, was in a care facility, racked with medical bills that piled higher every month. Naomi worked double shifts, picked up odd jobs, anything to keep the debt from swallowing them whole. James stared at the numbers, the stark reality of her life, and felt a pang he couldn't name. She'd never said a word, not a hint, not a plea. She just carried it. He didn't hesitate. A few calls, a wire transfer, and it was done. Hundreds of thousands wiped clean, funneled through an anonymous trust. He told himself it was practical. She couldn't fight his enemies if she was drowning. But deep down, it was more. It was her. Naomi found out 2 days later. A letter from the facility arrived at the penthouse, slipped into her bag by mistake. Confirmation that her mother's bills were paid in full. She stormed into James's office, the paper crumpled in her fist, her eyes blazing. What the hell is this? He looked up from his laptop, calm as ever. What's what? Don't play dumb, she snapped, slamming the letter on his desk. You paid it. All of it. I didn't ask for your charity, James. I know, he said, leaning back in his chair, his voice steady. That's why I did it. She faltered, her anger tripping over itself. What? You didn't ask, he repeated, standing now, closing the distance between them. You never do. You just keep going like you've got the whole damn world on your shoulders. I couldn't watch that anymore. Her breath hitched, the fight draining out of her. That's not your burden to fix. Maybe not, he said, softer now, his eyes locked on hers. But I wanted to. For you. She stared at him, the letter trembling in her hand. Anger battled something else. Gratitude, relief, a warmth she didn't want to feel. I don't need you saving me, she whispered, but it lacked conviction. I'm not saving you, he replied, his voice low, raw. I'm just here. The room stilled, the air thick with everything they wouldn't say. She turned away, clutching the letter, her chest tight. He'd seen her, really seen her, in a way no one else had. And it terrified her because admitting what that meant would crack her open. She fled to the kitchen, needing space, but the weight of his gesture followed her. She didn't owe him, didn't want to. Yet as she stood there, staring at the stove where they'd shared quiet nights, she felt it. A shift, a tether she couldn't cut. He wasn't just the billionaire anymore. He was James. Her James. And that truth lodged deep, unspoken but undeniable. Naomi lingered in the kitchen after her confrontation with James, the crumpled letter still clenched in her fist. His words, I'm just here, echoed in her head, stirring a storm she couldn't quiet. She wanted to be angry, to hold on to the independence she'd fought for, but the relief of her mother's debt being gone was a weight lifted she couldn't ignore. She glanced toward his office, where he'd returned to his work, and felt that pull again. Dangerous, undeniable. She shook it off, turning to the sink, but the tension stayed, a thread stretched tight. The next morning, James's best friend, Liam, arrived at the penthouse. Tall, charming, with a grin that disarmed most people, he'd been a constant in James's life, a brother in all but blood. Naomi had met him a few times, always polite but distant. Today he clapped James on the shoulder, his laugh filling the room. You look like hell, man, he said, dropping onto the couch. This nurse of yours keeping you in line? Barely, James replied, a faint smile tugging at his lips as he glanced at Naomi. She rolled her eyes but didn't bite back, busying herself with coffee in the kitchen. Liam's presence shifted the dynamic, a third wheel that grated on her nerves. She didn't trust him, not fully, but she couldn't place why. Later, as James stepped out to take a call, Liam lingered, pacing near the windows. Naomi watched him from the corner of her eye, her gut twisting. Then his phone rang. He answered it, his voice dropping low, and she caught the words that turned her blood cold. "The next attack is set," he murmured, his back to her. "He won't make it out alive this time." Her breath stopped. She ducked behind the counter, heart hammering, as Liam ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket. He betrayed James, his best friend. The man who'd laughed with him, stood by him, was plotting his death. She had to tell James, had to warn him. She edged toward the hall, but Liam's head snapped up, his eyes locking on hers. "You heard that, didn't you?" he said, his voice smooth but laced with ice. He moved fast, too fast, grabbing her arm before she could run. "Should have stayed out of it, Naomi." "Let go of me," she hissed, twisting, but his grip was iron. He dragged her toward the service stairs, her struggles useless against his strength. Down they went, into the basement levels of the building, a maze of concrete and shadows. He shoved her into a storage room, the door slamming shut behind her, the lock clicking with finality. "Stay quiet," he warned through the steel, "or I'll make sure you don't get a second chance." His footsteps faded, leaving her in the dark, her pulse racing. She pounded on the door, her fists bruising against the cold metal, but no one came. James was upstairs, oblivious, trusting the man who'd sold him out. She sank to the floor, her mind spinning. Liam knew everything. James's routines, his security, his weaknesses. And now he had her locked away, a loose end he'd tie up later. She didn't know how long she sat there, minutes, hours, before the panic sharpened into resolve. She had to get out, had to reach James. The basement was silent, but she wasn't helpless. She scanned the room, boxes, a rusty pipe, a vent high on the wall. Her hands shook as she grabbed the pipe, testing its weight. Liam thought he'd won, but he didn't know her. Not really, and she'd be damned if she let him take James down without a fight. Naomi's hands trembled as she gripped the rusty pipe, her breath shallow in the dim basement. The locked door loomed before her, a barrier between her and James, between her and the betrayal she had to stop. She slammed the pipe against the lock, the clang echoing in the confined space, but it didn't budge. Sweat beaded on her forehead, her arms aching with each strike. Liam's voice replayed in her mind. He won't make it out alive this time, fueling her desperation. She couldn't let that happen. Not to James. Not now, when she'd finally started to see him for who he was, beneath the arrogance and wealth. Above, in the penthouse, James paced the living room, his phone pressed to his ear. "She's not answering," he snapped at his security chief. "Find her, now!" Naomi had been gone too long, her coat still hung by the door, her bag untouched. Liam lounged on the couch, feigning concern, but James barely noticed, his gut screaming that something was wrong. He'd felt it the moment she'd slipped out of sight, a void he couldn't explain. Liam stood, stretching casually. "She probably just needed air, man. You worry too much." James shot him a look, sharp and searching, but said nothing. He didn't have time for Liam's nonchalance, not when every second gnawed at him. He grabbed his keys, ignoring the twinge in his still healing ribs, and headed for the door. "Stay here," he told Liam. "I'm checking the building." Downstairs, Naomi's strength waned, but she didn't stop. The pipe bent under her relentless blows, and finally the lock gave, a jagged snap that sent the door creaking open. She stumbled into the hall, her legs shaky, the pipe still clutched tight. She had to find James, had to warn him before Liam's plan unfolded. She took the stairs 2 at a time, her breath ragged, her mind racing with the weight of what she'd heard. But Liam was faster. He'd anticipated her escape, his footsteps silent as he descended from the penthouse, cutting her off at the stairwell's base. "You're a stubborn one," he said, his grin cold as he blocked her path. "Should have stayed put." She swung the pipe, but he dodged, grabbing her wrist and twisting until it clattered to the ground. Pain shot through her arm and she kicked out, catching his shin. He grunted, his grip loosening just enough for her to break free. She bolted, but he lunged, tackling her to the concrete. Her head slammed against the floor, stars bursting behind her eyes, and then darkness. James reached the lobby, his heart pounding as he scanned the empty space. No Naomi, no sign of her. He barked orders into his phone, his security team fanning out, but a chill crept up his spine. Something was off. Liam's casual dismissal, the quiet of the building. He turned back, instinct driving him toward the service stairs when his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Basement. Now he ran, shoving through the stairwell door, his ribs screaming with each step. The air grew colder as he descended, the faint sound of a struggle pulling him forward. He burst into the basement hall and saw her, Naomi, crumpled on the floor, Liam standing over her, a gun in his hand. Blood trickled from her temple, her chest rising faintly. "Liam?" James's voice cracked, disbelief warring with rage. "What the hell are you doing?" Liam turned, his face a mask of calm. "You were always too trusting, James. It's business. They paid me more than you ever could." James didn't hesitate. He charged, slamming into Liam before the gun could steady. They crashed against the wall, the weapon skittering across the floor. Liam fought back, fists connecting with James's jaw, but James was fueled by something fiercer. Fear, fury, the need to reach Naomi. He drove his elbow into Liam's gut, then his knee, until Liam staggered, gasping. James grabbed the pipe Naomi had dropped and swung, catching Liam's shoulder with a sickening crunch. Liam crumpled, groaning, and James kicked the gun out of reach. He dropped to his knees beside Naomi, his hands shaking as he lifted her into his arms. She was limp, her skin pale, a bruise blooming where she'd hit the ground. "Naomi," he rasped, cradling her against his chest. "Stay with me, please. You're the only thing that makes sense in my life." His voice broke, raw and desperate, as he brushed her hair back, his fingers stained with her blood. He'd lost so much: trust, control, years to ambition. But losing her, that would break him. "Come on," he whispered, rocking her gently. "You're tougher than this. You have to be." Footsteps pounded behind him, his security finally catching up. "Boss!" one shouted, but James didn't look up. He held her tighter, his breath hitching as her eyelids fluttered. She stirred, a soft groan escaping her lips, and then her eyes opened, hazy but alive. Tears welled, spilling down her cheeks as she focused on him. "James?" she murmured, her voice weak. "I'm here," he said, relief crashing through him. "I've got you." She reached up, her hand trembling as it brushed his face, smearing blood across his cheek. "Liam, he's the one. The attacks—" "I know," James said, his jaw tight. "It's over. He's done." She nodded, tears mixing with the dirt on her face, and for a moment, they just stayed there. Her in his arms, him shielding her from the chaos. The guards hauled Liam up, his groans fading as they dragged him away. But James didn't care. All that mattered was Naomi, her breath against his neck, her pulse under his fingers, the fact that she was still here. "You scared me," he admitted, his voice low, unguarded. "I thought I'd lost you." "You didn't," she whispered, her hand curling into his shirt. "I'm still here." He pressed his forehead to hers, the world narrowing to just them. The betrayal, the danger, the blood, it all fell away. She was his anchor, his reason, and he'd fight through hell to keep her safe. Her tears slowed, her grip tightening, and in that quiet, battered moment, they both knew something had changed, something permanent. The guards hovered, waiting for orders, but James waved them off. "Give us a minute," he said, his voice steady now. He helped Naomi sit up, supporting her as she winced, and they leaned against the wall together, bruised and battered, but alive. The fight was over, for now, but the bond between them? That was just beginning. James held Naomi against the cold basement wall, her weight slumped into him as her breathing steadied. The blood on her face was drying, a stark smear against her pale skin, but her eyes, hazel and fierce, held his with a clarity that cut through the haze of adrenaline. His hands trembled as he brushed her cheek, the fear of losing her still pulsing in his veins. Liam was gone, hauled off by security, his betrayal a wound James would carry, but Naomi was here, alive, real, and grounding him in a way nothing else ever had. "Stay with me," he murmured again, softer now, less a plea and more a promise. She nodded, her fingers tightening in his shirt, and they sat there, battered and bruised, the silence heavy with what they'd survived. His security lingered nearby, their radios crackling. But James didn't move. Not yet. He needed this, her, more than he'd ever admit out loud. Days later, the penthouse was quiet again, the chaos of Liam's treachery fading into a tense aftermath. James's team had moved fast, interrogating Liam, tracing the money, dismantling the network of rivals who'd funded the attacks. The threat was gone, snuffed out with ruthless efficiency, but the scars remained. Naomi healed slowly, her bruises fading, though she still flinched at sudden noises. James watched her, his chest tight every time she winced, knowing he'd brought this into her life. One evening, as the city skyline glittered beyond the penthouse windows, James found her in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup, her go-to comfort. Now, a ritual that tethered them both. He leaned in the doorway, his usual sharpness softened by exhaustion and something deeper. She glanced up, catching his stare, and paused, the spoon hovering. "What?" she asked, a faint smile tugging at her lips. He didn't answer right away. He crossed the room, slow and deliberate, stopping just close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her. "I've faced death," he said, his voice low, steady. "Betrayal, loneliness, years of it, building walls, chasing power, thinking that was enough. But nothing." He paused, his throat tightening. "Nothing scared me more than losing you." Naomi's breath caught, the spoon slipping from her hand to clatter against the pot. Her eyes searched his, wide and unguarded, tears welling as his words sank in. "James, I love you," he said, the confession spilling out raw and unpolished. "I didn't know what that meant, what it could feel like until you. You walked into that hospital room and turned my whole damn world upside down. And I'd face it all again, every crash, every fight, if it meant keeping you here." She stared at him, tears spilling now, her hands trembling as she reached for him. Her fingers brushed his chest, tentative at first, then fisted in his shirt as she pulled him closer. "You really are impossible, James Lancaster," she said, her voice breaking into a shaky laugh, a smile blooming through the tears. He cupped her face, his thumbs wiping at the damp trails on her cheeks. "Is that a yes?" "To what?" she teased, though her eyes shone with the answer. "To this," he murmured, leaning in, his lips brushing hers, soft, hesitant, then firm as she melted into him. The kiss was everything they'd held back, fear, fight, and a love that had grown in the cracks of their chaos. She tasted of salt and warmth, and he poured himself into it, every ounce of the man he'd become because of her. When they parted, foreheads pressed together, she laughed again, a sound that lit up the room. "You're still a pain," she whispered, her hands sliding to his shoulders. "And you're still stubborn," he shot back, grinning. A real grin, free of the weight he'd carried too long. "Guess we're stuck with each other." She nodded, her smile steady now, and they stood there, wrapped in each other, the soup forgotten on the stove. The city hummed beyond the glass, indifferent to their story, but in that kitchen, they'd built something stronger than steel, an unshakable bond forged in danger and tempered by trust. Weeks turned to months, and the penthouse became theirs, not just his. Her books stayed scattered on the coffee table, her laugh filled the halls, and James found himself softer, lighter, a man who'd traded control for connection. One night they stood on the balcony, the cool air brushing their skin as they watched the lights below. He slipped an arm around her waist, pulling her close, and she leaned into him, her head resting against his chest. "Think we'll ever get tired of this?" she asked, her voice quiet, content. "Never," he said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "You're my home, Naomi. Took me long enough to figure that out." She tilted her head up, her eyes meeting his, and smiled, a smile that held every fight, every tear, every moment that had led them here. "Good thing I'm patient." He laughed, the sound carrying into the night, and they stayed there, wrapped in each other, a love that had weathered the storm and come out stronger. The threats were gone, the past buried, but what they'd found, each other, was a victory worth every battle. Together they were unstoppable, a beautiful, satisfying end to a story that had begun with a crash and ended with a promise. Have you ever taken a risk for love? Let's talk about it in the comments. Thank you for watching this incredible story. If this touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Let's continue spreading love and kindness.